The Hoop Heads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoopheads, wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. We've had their partnership manager and training specialist Jefferson Mason and marketing manager Nick Bartlett on the show in the past, and we couldn't be more excited about what they're doing for the game of basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market and truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Beyond efficient reps, Dr. Dish provides training expertise and versatility designed to develop complete players. The new Dr. Dish CT machine has further revolutionized basketball training with over 150 plus on-demand individual and team workouts from some of the best coaches and trainers in the game. These workouts include video instruction and combine game-like shooting drills with ball handling, conditioning, and agility drills. Along with workouts, the Dr. Dish training management system also provides stat tracking and analytics to track progress and ensure accountability. These are just a few reasons why top programs like Duke, North Carolina, Louisville, Florida, Baylor, and countless others are upgrading to Dr. Dish. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com. Follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And make sure you mention the Hoopheads Podcast to get $300 off your next Dr. Dish purchase. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get out and get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
In the summer of 1968, there was a young man who was the head coach of West Point by the name of Bob Knight, who Garf convinced to come be the lead camp coach that week for $50 for the session for a full week. And Mr. Knight told Garf, he said, "Hey Garf, what do you guys do for stations?" And he said, "Excuse me? There's no train stations around here. You know, this is upstate New York. You know, we're off-site." And he goes, No. I'm talking about teaching stations."
Founded in 1966, Five-Star Basketball Camp was the brainchild of two New York City basketball junkies, Howard Garfinkel and Will Klein, who shared a singular passion and purpose, creating a top-notch teaching camp to help kids improve their games. Fate has been good to Five Star. Future Hall of Famers Hubie Brown and Chuck Daly taught and lectured at that very first session. Bob Knight invented teaching stations as the camp's lead instructor a year later. Dozens of legendary coaches, including Rick Pitino and John Calipari, all launched their careers at Five Star. More than a cradle for coaches, Five Star has been a proving ground for the everyday blue-collar player and blue chips alike. Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, Dominique Wilkins, Isiah Thomas, Chris Mullin, LeBron James, Chris Paul, Kevin Durant, Stephen Curry, Carmelo Anthony, Kemba Walker, Kyrie Irving, and Karl-Anthony Towns have all worn the iconic orange and white t-shirt. Joining us on this episode are Peter Robert Casey and Carl Blum from JDS Sports, a next-generation sports, media, and entertainment holding company that owns and manages the Five Star brand. Check out our website, hoopheadspod.com, where you can listen to every episode in our archive. After you've listened to this episode or one of your other favorites, please head over to your favorite podcast app and leave us a 5-star rating and review. Those reviews help others in the basketball community find our show. Make sure you're subscribed to the Hoopheads Podcast so you never miss an episode. The pod is available on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, and YouTube. 5 Star is an integral part of basketball here in the United States. We can't tell the history of the game without it. You're going to love this episode with Peter Casey and Carl Blum from 5 Star Basketball. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads Podcast. It's Mike Linsing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel, and tonight we are pleased to welcome from 5 Star Basketball, Carl Blum and Peter Casey. Guys, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. We are excited to have you guys on. With all the guests that we've been able to have on the podcast, it's amazing how many times the conversation has turned to 5 Star Basketball. So to be able to have you two guys on to talk a little bit about the history, talk a little bit about the present, and talk a little bit about the future of 5 Star Basketball, we are very excited about the opportunity to dig in with the two of you. So I want to start out, just maybe each of you give us a little bit of background about how you came to be associated with 5 Star Basketball, and then we're going to dig into the history of 5 Star Basketball Camp.
Sure thing. PRC, you want to go first?
I'll take it first. Yeah, so I was a three-time five-star camper, not a very good one, have you? But I went to five-star in the summers of 96, 97, and 98. So back in the days when they had a presence in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, and also at Robert Morris College in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so I always joke with people that I went to five-star as an unranked and unrecruited prospect, and I left five-star as an unranked and unrecruited prospect. And so to make a long story short, in 2010, an investor who we work with, Carl and I, at a holding company called JDS Sports, him and a partner acquired the IP marketing rights to Five Star, and the founding family continued to run the camps. This was Will Klein and his son Lee Klein, and so they were continuing to run camps. And then at the tail end of 2016, we acquired the camp rights as well. So it came into the JDS Sports portfolio at that time, and that's kind of the context of how we got acquainted with it.
Carl,
Yeah.
how about you?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different story. I was a basketball player as well, but I'm a little bit younger than PRC, so I kind of missed the heyday of five-star basketball and the camps. But my story is that I was actually playing baseball in college, in grad school over at Rutgers, and part of my requirement for graduating the program was I needed to find an internship. And through, a couple of people that I had spoken to, I came in touch with Joe Sandberg, our chairman at JDS Sports and PRC, and they had this really cool holding company going where it was focused in sports, technology, all these really exciting things for a young kid to be looking at. And five-star basketball, because of PRC and Joe's history with the brand, with the camp, happened to be in the portfolio as well. So for me, I saw this opportunity to get involved with a bunch of different really cool companies, and five-star basketball is one of them. And I've been lucky enough to be able to touch that every day almost.
Yeah, it's very cool. And I know that both of you have a lot of pride in what Five Star was, is, and is going to continue to be. So let's look now backwards to the history of Five Star basketball camp. And I think when we start with the history of Five Star, we talk about the most recognizable figure in the history of Five Star basketball, Howard Garfinkel. So just tell us a little bit about how Howard got the camp started, why he got started, and how it evolved over time.
Yeah, so Howard founded the camp with Will in the summer of 1966. And it was a very unique time, as you guys know, probably as college basketball fans. That was the same year that Texas Western upset Kentucky in the national championship game. And so Garf, growing up, used to go to kind of a traditional summer camp called Camp Mascoma up in New England. And so he was always he called himself like a camp junkie. He just loved going to camp. And so he went to that. He had like the seed of inspiration of always wanting to be involved with the camp. And then during that time in 64 and 65, Jack Donahue, the coach of Power Memorial, where Lou Alcindor had played, used to run an all sports camp called Friendship Farm. And Garf was a counselor. And one of his guys in his bunk was a young man who was a high school sophomore named Rick Pitino from Long Island. And they used to give Garf a really hard time about camp. And so one of the most popular sports at Friendship Farm was basketball. And so Garf, kind of at the time, he was known as a scout. They used to call him a bird dog. And he would basically be the scout for North Carolina State in that program. And he would tell the head coach at North Carolina State all the best prospects in the New York City tri-state area who they should have their eyes on. And so he was very much immersed in the game from a scouting perspective, but had this passion for the idea of a basketball camp. And what he did was him and Mr. Klein partnered with Roy Rubin, who at the time was a high school basketball coach at Columbus High School in New York City, who then went on to LIU, which was a powerhouse in the 50s and 60s. And they launched what was initially called the Roy Rubin Basketball School in 1966. It didn't actually take the name Five Star until 1968, but what was invented became the first basketball specific camp of its kind. And right from day one, you had a coaching staff that included Hubie Brown, who's a Hall of Famer, as we all know, And the first lecturer that summer was a guy by the name of Chuck Daly, who is a Hall of Famer and was the Dream Team coach and two-time NBA champion coach. So rich history from day one, but the inspiration really was just to have fun in the sun and help kids get out of the city up into the country and improve their games over the summer. So an amazing trajectory from what became just like a simple idea.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that here's a guy from New York City who ends up having this camp out in rural America, in rural Pennsylvania. And when we think about the way that top prospects and players go through the system today, and they're playing in beautiful gyms that are air conditioned and all this stuff, and then the idea that Garf had initially is we're going to be outside, kind of based on, as you said, that summer camp model that he grew up where it was kind of the all sports things going on. You're outside in nature, and the camp, the basketball camp, almost took on that personality initially with all the outdoor basketball the kids were playing as a part of it.
And no doubt. And, Garf always, in the times that I met him and spoke with him, he always credited the coaches and the counselors for bringing that intensity. They were just as competitive as the players were, but for different purpose in teaching the game. And so in the summer of 1968, there was a young man who was the head coach of West Point by the name of Bob Knight, who Garf convinced to come be the lead camp coach that week for $50 for the session for a full week. And Mr. Knight told Garf, he said, "Hey Garf, what do you guys do for stations?" And he said, "Excuse me? There's no train stations around here. This is upstate New York. We're off site." And he goes, No. I'm talking about teaching stations. And so Garf had no idea what he was talking about, and he invented what became the backbone and soul of Five Star, which are these teaching stations, basically breaking down all the rudimentary skills of basketball: passing, shooting, defense, rebounding, one-on-one moves. And all of the counselors who worked the camp had a special skill set and passion that they brought to the table. So to your point, like, they made Five Star special almost from day one, just by bringing that intensity and their knowledge and their passion and sharing it with kids who wanted clearly to get better, and spent 7 days just feasting on the fundamentals of basketball.
So two things that I want to bring up here. One is you think about fundamental station work and the fact that at this point, any basketball camp that you go to, I defy you to find one that doesn't incorporate fundamental station work into their daily schedule. So you can attribute all that back to the original stations that were created by Bob Knight and Garf at Five Star. So that's something that has stuck. Obviously, it was very successful because it's still around today. In whatever camp you go to is based upon those fundamental stations. I know our camps are based on them, and any camp you're going to go to, you're going to get those fundamental stations. And then the second thing that you said that struck me was the fact that the coaches, in addition to the players, were competitive with one another. And I'm going to share a story with you guys that we just had on a coach named Joe's Decision, who he was the head coach at one time at Carlisle High School in Pennsylvania, where Billy Owens went to school and Jeff Lebo. And currently Joe runs a training business called Unleash Potential. But he's been on the podcast with us twice, and he's shared this story both times. But the story is that he was at Five Star, and he was out, I believe he was at Robert Morris, and he was out on the tennis courts. It's 100 degrees, and he's running his station, and he's trying to do the best job he can, and he's looking around at other coaches, whatever. And he said he would see Garf come walking by his station, and he would kind of be looking out of the corner of his eye at Garf, checking. As Garf is checking him out, he's looking to make sure that he's doing a good job. And he said Garf would just give him a little head nod. And he goes, that inspired me to no end. He goes, it was amazing. Just that little head nod from Howard Garfinkel made all the difference in making him feel like he was doing a good job. And it's a case of, again, as you said, the coaches were competitive, trying to raise each other's games. And that in turn attracted some of the best players in the country as the camp began to build its reputation.
That's exactly it. Carl and I heard a great joke this summer. There was a James Ross, they called him the healer. He was one of the first trainers, not the initial one, but a longtime fixture at the camp, just a real old school dude. And he told Carl and I, Garf would go watch the stations more so for the coaching than the actual players. And what he would say is he would judge each coach based on the number of cigarettes he would smoke. So if you were, now Garf, by the way, this was a different time, different era, right? This
For
is
sure.
when he'd light up just chain smoking all week long at camp. And if you were a one cigarette coach, you really weren't any good. But if he stayed there and puffed 3 cigarettes back to back to back, then you knew you were a special coach. And he clearly, it was just like, to your point, that nod that you got. If you got 3 cigarettes of his time, then you were a good coach.
That's good stuff. And I went to 5-star one time between my junior and senior year. And if there's one indelible memory I have of Garf, it's for sure the smoking and the two-handed set shot when the group of kids is gathered around before you're going to have a lecture or before a coach is going to come in and speak. He launches that. He launches that. Do you have? Yeah, he launches that two-handed set shot. I think those were probably his. For people who are only vaguely familiar with 5-star and Garfinkel, I think those are probably the 2 most iconic things when people first think of him. That's what they think of initially right out of the gate.
Yeah, and one thing that made it special, the delineation, by the way, Garf and Will Klein, and Will was equally instrumental in making 5-star successful and what it became. The old saying was Garf ran the show and Will made sure the show went on. Like Will managed the money. Will did all the operational pieces. But to your point, Garf treated every camp session as if it was its own Broadway show. And so he was also, not only for that set shot was he known for in the cigarettes, but he would give these introductions. Anytime there was a lecturer who came to the camp to speak after lunch, he gave that coach a 20-minute introduction and made them literally feel like they were going into the Hall of Fame. So that was one of the other things that a lot of people remember Garf for, was a lot of those introductions that just kept going on and on and on. But, and make every kid stand up in camp and give a standing ovation after that lecture.
He was probably trying to build in some rest for those kids who were out on the 100-degree blacktop for a couple hours, just trying to get them a little extra rest with the introduction.
There was no
discreetly.
Right, exactly, without them knowing it. Oh, that's good stuff. That's funny. All right, so I think as we move forward here and we start talking about some of the greatest players in the history of the game that have been a part of the 5-star basketball camp, and I know that as you go through the history, and we can look up basically the who's who of the NBA, and just about every player from, let's say, the mid 70s through the early 90s came through 5-star at some point. And you can just look and search old 5-star pictures or go on your guys' Twitter account or the website and just see some of the illustrious alumni that have been there. And one of the things that, as I was reading and doing some research, and I remember this in the week that I was there, Billy Owens was the star player from Carlisle, Pennsylvania, who ended up being the 3rd overall draft pick in the NBA. He was the big name guy the week I was there, and I remember him working in the cafeteria after everybody would get done eating, and he'd be cleaning up and clearing off the tables. And as I was reading through and doing some research, I saw that there was a lot of those top players ended up getting that job working in the cafeteria, and then in exchange, that kind of paid their tuition at camp. So can you talk a little bit about how that came to pass, if you know anything about that particular tradition at 5-star?
Yeah, never forget it. In fact, it was called the Camper Worker Program. And Garf designed it to your point, to make sure the best kids could one, come to camp, but come for 2 sessions. And so if you were a camper worker, if you were special enough to bus tables and serve what we call bug juice back then, you got 2 weeks of camp for the price of 1. So it was a 50% discount. And everyone from Michael Jordan to LeBron James to Kevin Durant were camper workers at 5-star. It was a special role where you knew the kids that were cleaning up and bussing tables after lunch and breakfast each day. Those were the best kids in camp. And those were the same kids that when the lecturers were out there demonstrating the drills, they would call on those same guys to participate and demonstrate what they were teaching. So it was funny in today's world, summer grassroots basketball, the best kids, you can't ask them to do anything
right
these days. But back then you got to do extra work if you were the best kids.
Yeah, it's definitely, again, it's one more thing that you compare and contrast the system that we had set up back in the heyday of 5-star versus the system we have today. And I think you're 100% right that kids today would look at that and go, there's no way, there's no way that I'm busting tables just so I should be getting in here free no matter what. People are flying me across the country and giving me all kinds of gear or whatever. And it was just, again, it was a totally different era. And I think about that also in terms of just the outdoor basketball. And at the time when Five Star was in its heyday, that's where basketball players were made. They were made outside at the playground, at the local rec park, wherever it might have been. That's where the majority of the best players spent their time playing basketball. And so when they got to Five Star and they were playing outside, it didn't seem at all unusual, and they were used to it. And you take today's players who play very rarely outside and are most often in a gym and with kids their own age and all that kind of thing. I just think that it's such a different culture, and it's one of the things that the demise of the playground basketball culture is one of the things that I think that I'm most sad about, that era of basketball ending for the most part. Now, I'm sure there are still pockets around the United States where people are still playing outdoor basketball, but as a general rule, I don't think, especially not the best high school players across the country, they're not playing outside the way your Alonzo Mournings and Michael Jordans and Chris Pauls and LeBron James would come to Five Star and play outdoor basketball.
Yeah, that's something we tried to do, trying to bring back a little bit. I know it's 2020 and the game is definitely different and things are in general different. But even for a guy like me who came into Five Star after the heyday and didn't get to experience, this era of basketball that you're talking about, through listening to the lectures and looking at the archives and talking to PRC about what Five Star really was, we settled upon the idea that we should bring Five Star back outdoors, and we did this past fall, where we went outdoors in East River Park in Manhattan, had a really cool day where we did a completely free give back clinic actually, and we had 15 kids there. Coach Tobin Anderson, our director, ran it. It was awesome.
Yeah, I think if we could somehow get outdoor basketball to come back, it's one of the things that I'm most sad about when I think about today's players, or I think about my own kids growing up. The fact that they're not going to get to experience that playground culture that I experienced. It just breaks my heart that some of the best times in my life were spent on the playground with people of all different races and all different ages. And I think that's something that kids today miss out on. I think Five Star was a really big part of that.
Definitely.
All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit about, as we got into the summer camp competition, let's say, because at first there wasn't very many camps, as you talked about earlier, Peter. It was the start of when Five Star started. It was kind of on its own. It was something new. It was groundbreaking. It wasn't something that everybody else was doing. But eventually, as we all know, success breeds copycats.
That's right.
And so you had some other camps that came on the scene. You had the BC camp, and then eventually you got into the top 50 ABFE
Yes.
top 150 camp that Nike started to put together, and that became a challenge for Will and Garf as some other people started to come on the scene and try to, for lack of a better way of saying, horn in on on what they had how they had cornered the market. So can you talk a little bit about anything from that era of camps as the camps started to compete with one another for some of these top players?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And the ABFE camp actually was the first kind of sign that like cracked the foundation of having like a true monopoly on summer basketball for Five Star. It was and what's very common today, it was almost a marketing event. So the kids that got to go to AFBE went entirely for free, right? And so they weren't paying tuition to go. And then I think initially started through a nonprofit, and then ultimately that kind of morphed into ABCD camp, which became the go-to camp every summer.
Right.
And so what it did to Five Star, Five Star in the beginning, if you went to the Pittsburgh 1 session at Robert Morris, you knew you were like the elite kid. And so that AFBE camp started encroaching on Pit 1, and then Pit 2 became the Cadillac session of Five Star camp, if you will. And then what really triggered the competition, I mean, mind you, then came the Metro Indexes, the BC camps, the Eastern Invitational camps and the like. But AAU basketball, the idea of competing on a team in the spring and summer, right? And getting exposure through these national invitational tournaments, also, by the way, for free, because they were sponsored by shoe companies, made it very difficult, again, for a value proposition to charge, a week's worth of money when you can go play for free in front of college coaches. So, competition did make it harder to attract the elite kid, especially through the 90s and early 2000s. And now it's like a completely different landscape altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things that's most sad about the whole thing is just the fact that these fundamental camps, which I would consider 5-star to be a fundamental teaching camp, they're just not nearly as popular, and there isn't as many of them today because, as you said, the exposure that players get, one, from going out on the AAU circuit, and then two, I think the other thing that goes along with that is if you give a kid a choice between going and really working on their game at a station in that kind of environment versus, hey, I just get to go out and run up and down and play games, the vast majority of kids are going to probably choose to go and play in the games. And so it's just interesting how things have shifted. I still think there is a place, as I'm sure we'll talk about later, I still think there's a place for the fundamental teaching camp. And Jason and I have been fortunate enough to be associated with a couple good ones with Snow Valley out in Iowa, and Coach Showalter from USA Basketball. And then we were also fortunate enough to go down and be a part of the Jay Billis Skills Academy down in Charlotte. And both of those camps I would equate to, at least, not in terms of the talent that's there, certainly, but in terms of the way that things are set up. I would compare that to the way 5-star was set up, in that you have the teaching part of it, which is a huge piece of the camp. And then the other thing that we've talked about several times now is just the quality of the coaching staff. And I think that's something that you can go back, and as much as we want to read off the roster of 5-star alumni in terms of players, you could probably make an argument that the roster of coaches that have come through 5-star is equally, if not more impressive than the list of players that have come through.
I mean, over 320 camp counselors that have come through 5-star as high school coaches went on to the Division I or NBA level. So many coaches. I mentioned Bob Knight in 68, Hubie Brown in 66, but you have everyone from Pitino to Calipari to Tommy Amaker to
Mike Fratello,
Brad Stevens. The list goes on and on of great coaches who've come through 5-star and made their name there, got their start there.
It's kind of like, in a lot of ways, 5-star is old school, but then in another sense, it's kind of, the history there was so much before its time. And what I mean by that is I have the opportunity to go back and listen to, we have all of these lectures from all of these coaches, audio recorded, and I've had the opportunity to go back through this archive. And as an athlete myself, I've had some really influential coaches that, I played baseball at Duke, and my coach there was a really influential guy in my life. And he was spreading these ideas to me for the first time about teamwork and competitiveness and, how you teach somebody something. And a lot of those ideas that he's being inspired by guys like Bill Belichick and Nick Saban. And then I went back and I was listening to these archives from 1970, and you could see that 5-star was a place where a lot of these ideas in coaching were blossoming. And in that sense, I think, 5-star was way before its time.
Head Start Basketball, along with members of the Jay Billis Skills Camp staff, will be hosting the very first Prime Skills Camp, an affiliate of the Jay Billis Skills Camp that is held annually in Charlotte, North Carolina. Prime Skills Camp will take place on the campus of Western Reserve Academy, just outside of Cleveland, Ohio, June 26th through the 28th, and will be designed for boys rising to grades 6 through 9. Prime Skills Camp will mirror the Jay Billis Skills Camp in daily programming, teaching, coach-to-camper ratio, and quality of instruction. Prime Skills Camp brings all of the team-oriented individual instruction, focus on the fundamentals, and high-level coaching to young men aspiring to a high school varsity basketball experience. This camp is operated by Billis Camp veterans and includes the Jay Billis Coaches Development Program alongside the camp, ensuring that the quality of teaching and coaching at this camp is second to none. Please visit headstartbasketball.com or jbilliscamp.com for more information or to get registered. Absolutely. You put so many bright people in the same environment where they get a chance to, as we all know, when the kids go to bed at a camp, the coaches then stay up and get together or go do things, whatever. And that's a meeting of the minds where people are talking and discussing and thinking about what works for them and sharing and comparing notes and ideas. And I think anytime when you can get a bunch of smart people in the same room or in the same camp, in this case, great things are going to happen. I think you're 100% right, Carl, in that when you get people into that type of environment and you get them talking, you get them thinking, and then they're able to put together those kinds of ideas that have a tremendous impact. And you think about what you just said and the way that coaching is today and those issues that a lot of coaches probably weren't thinking about back in the early 70s. But here you had this hotbed of coaching talent where people were thinking about it. And these were some of the guys, as Peter said, that went on to achieve at the very, very highest levels of the game.
Definitely.
Yeah. One thing Five-Star was not known for over the years was its food. It was horrific. And so what would happen is when the lights went out in the bunks at night, all the coaches would actually go off campus and meet at the diner, and the salt and pepper shakers at each table became the X's and O's on the table. Guys just comparing plays and sets and having these conversations deep into the night, only to have to wake up to, Garf's jazz music at 7 a.m., to get to morning calisthenics. So, it was an institution. And actually Tom Konchowski, the great scout who worked Five-Star for many years, he called Five-Star one of the greatest think tanks of basketball in history of the game. To your point, it was like coaches sharing knowledge with one another, coaches pushing one another to rise and elevate their own careers and teaching abilities together. So what was sad, which kind of hampered this whole thing, by the way, as you guys probably know, in 1991, the NCAA made it, they basically banned Division I coaches from lecturing at or working non-institutional camps. And this was the success of Five-Star because it potentially gave them a recruiting advantage to be close to these elite players. And so when you had that happen, the Caliparis, the Pittinos, Coach K, who used to come over all the time, the Pete Carrills, all these great coaches, Dean Smith, who would come lecture at Five-Star, were no longer able to do so. And the unfortunate part of that was that the kid, the player who was trying to get better and learn from these amazing teachers was no longer able to do that. And so that was kind of the collateral damage of this rule change.
Yeah, you wonder at the time, because as I was reading, I came across that same thing. And, you think about the people that came through there, and then you think about the fact that they were no longer able to do that. You wonder if the NCAA at that time really thought about sort of I understand the intent of what they were trying to do. The intent of it makes sense on some level that
sure,
coaches who are in there did have an advantage. If I can be at a station every day and I'm working with Michael Jordan, certainly I'm going to have an advantage over somebody who's not there every day. So you get that, but yet at the same time, I think it created this other situation where now you have these coaches who, they have their own camps, so now they're inviting certain players to their camps on campuses, and it also opened things up for I think it started to pave the way for, as we talked about earlier, that AAU system. And so I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to go back and talk to somebody who was part of that ruling and see what the intent was, and if they foresaw some of the changes that it was going to create in the grassroots basketball landscape at that time.
No, I mean, listen, there's a valid point, like the proximity and, how closeness you could be to a kid all week and build a relationship with that player, no doubt would give anyone an advantage, presumably.
Right.
But if you think about it, Garf always used to fight tooth and nail about this when they were trying to enact this rule change. Was these guys earned that advantage. They started at Five-Star as high school coaches. They rose to become college coaches on their own merit. And this argument came up again much later when Coach K was coaching the Olympic team, right? Now, he's rubbing shoulders at the time with Kobe, LeBron, and all these greats, and Dwayne Wade, and everyone's like, hey, it's not fair. It's helping his recruiting, right? It's like, but Coach K earned that role.
Right, exactly. Right? It's not like somebody just gave him that job.
So yeah, there's to your point, like there was definitely a valid reason, and it was coaches, by the way. It wasn't the NCAA. This was a body of like the Coaches Association that were basically helping the NCAA create those rules, and they were the ones complaining. If you weren't an insider, you're an outsider, and so if you're an outsider, you don't want the insider to have an advantage. So it made sense.
Yeah, it made sense. I mean, you could see the intent of it, and yet, unfortunately, there was these sort of collateral damage that was done to those coaches being able to get in there, and then conversely also to 5-star as well. Peter, I wanted to ask you, when you were talking about the think tank and coaches going out and using the salt and pepper shakers as X's and O's, when you went to basketball camp when you were a kid, did you process at all that when you were going to bed as a camper that the coaches were then heading out for the night to go and grab a beer or talk X's and O's? I never had any idea. I remember when I worked my first overnight basketball camp at Ohio State when Gary Williams was there.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember that first, I think I was after maybe my freshman year in college, and I was part of the coaching staff. And I remember just being absolutely stunned that when all the kids went to bed, the coaches were like, all right, where are we going? Where are we going? Where are we going to be? I had no idea.
Well, at 5-star, yes, I could tell there was something different. I went to 4 camps per summer. I was a junkie. And like, for example, I'd go to Anthony Mason basketball camp, and
Nice.
he'd show up at 2 a.m. and start wrestling the kids, him and his cousin, right? And like raiding the bunks, throwing kids, like flipping their beds. So, the teaching wasn't as serious there versus 5-star. What you could tell at 5-star, by the way, was, and a lot of this was derived from stations, but also a lack of sleep because these guys were out late, was by midweek, their voices would be so hoarse, right? You could hear it. Like they truly left it all out there. Again, it was the blazing sun under the hot heat of Pittsburgh on the blacktop. And so the conditions, and by the way, like 5-star used to be 7 nights. Like there's no camp anymore that's more than 3 nights. It was 7 nights. And so it was just a different time, different era when these coaches were coming up that are now in the Hall of Fame, and they're now at the top of college basketball. But yeah, it was a special time.
Talk to me a little bit about the famous Station 13.
Yes.
Where it came from, why it came to sort of be a symbol of 5-star teaching.
Well, there's actually funny, like the origin story of Station 13 is different depending on who you ask. But the one thing that every side agrees on, the reason why Station 13 was born was, to your earlier point, like Garf did not want you to go get rest. Kids were walking back to their bunks, and one of the coaches was like, this is a sin. These guys are walking back to their bunks. You have all these great coaches here, right? And they're available to learn from. And so, whether you ask Will Klein or back in the day, you ask Garf who created Station 13, a lot of people credit Rick Pitino with this and mentioning that to Garf, like, hey, Garf, why are these kids going back to their bunk? Like, they should be out here learning. And so what it became was optional individualized instruction. And it was optional in the sense that, sure, you didn't have to go, but every coaching camp, every scout, every college coach who came to recruit was taking note who came to Station 13. And that award, Mr. Station 13, that was given out at the end of camp, was in Garf's eyes more important than most outstanding player, more important than best, playmaker, because it showed that kid is that serious about improving their game. And so it became its own, stations were always, like I said, the backbone and soul of camp. And if that's true, then Station 13 was the pinnacle of this experience.
Yeah, and I think it became, if I'm not mistaken, it also became some like a piece of pride for the coaches that were able to go out and be the coach that was teaching Station 13. So you not only had it being very important to the players to be out there so that they could be seen and also be improving their game, but also it was sort of prestigious for a coach to be able to be the coach of Station 13 for that particular day or that particular week.
That's right. It was like an elevated role, like an emeritus role at camp.
You gotta love that. You gotta love it. Hey, Hoopheads Nation, check out this new offering from Tyler Whitcomb Basketball Coaching Courses. The Steve Wojciechowski Marquette Playbook by Brian Applin is now available. Wojciechowski is in his 6th season as the head men's basketball coach at Marquette University. Visit coachtube.com/users/Tyler Whitcomb to check out this great resource. All right, so as we start thinking about 5-star and how it's sort of wound down as a result of this shift towards AAU basketball, can you talk a little bit about how it sort of ended, and then we'll bring into the story kind of where you guys are now with it?
Yeah, so, 5-star in the probably, I would say, the early to mid 2000s, you still had guys like Stephen Curry and Kevin Durant and John Wall coming to camp, but the cluster of elite players stopped coming, and they were going to all the shoe company circuit events and all the AAU events nationally traveling. And so you started getting more of just this is a suburban kid looking to get better. And that's ultimately what 5-star in the beginning was created for. It really wasn't to necessarily attract the most elite players. It was just to help any basketball player looking to get an edge, to give them that teaching first experience. And so that we've always stayed true to that. And like one thing I credit Garf was like he never put numbers on the back of those shirts when you went to camp. He didn't want it to be a meat market. It became a recruiting event because the top kids were there, right? And so that was just a function of its success, but it was never the intent of the camp. And so we kept true to that. And all of our camps throughout have always been focused on making sure every kid leaves that experience, hopefully with some tools and additional knowledge to help, improve their game. So that's never shied away. But yeah, it's the factor that AAU, other camps, grassroots basketball to some degree is saturated is why, 5-star attracting the elite kid kind of, went away and probably never will come back.
Yeah, I think to some degree you're probably underselling the amount of competition that's out there. It's just incredible if you look around the country at the number of people who either have an AAU club or have a camp or are doing training. You think about comparatively to when even back, Peter, when you were talking mid-90s, when you were going to camp, there still wasn't the proliferation of people in the youth sports market that there is today. And clearly it's become a multi-billion-dollar business. So there's just way more competition out there. So talk a little bit about what you guys are doing right now with the brand, and then we can get into where you kind of see it going in the future.
Go ahead, Carl. That's a good one.
Yeah. So, I like I keep bringing up, I wasn't around when 5-star was at its peak. But the cool thing that I got to realize right away was as I'm learning about 5-star, I'm learning about the history, there is this population of people that 5-star, it really means something to them, whether they heard about it when they were growing up or they had the opportunity to go to a camp, that experience stuck with them. So in PRC and JDS Sports and myself sitting around and kicking the tires on how we want to use 5-star now, the cool thing was that there were so many other people that wanted to jump at the opportunity to come back on board when we wanted to relaunch a camp. So the last year we actually partnered with the MBPA. There's two great guys over there, Chris Jean and Dan Gladstone in grassroots basketball. And PRC has a relationship with them, and they're very much 5-star guys. They know what it means to run a 5-star style camp, and they have the infrastructure at the MBPA to put on a big operation. So we partnered with the MBPA, and it was a big success where we had our first relaunch camp back in Manhattan at Basketball City last summer. Co-branded MBPA 5-star basketball camp. It was good.
Yeah, one thing to add, guys, by the way, all the guys that went to camp in the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s are now parents, and their kids play basketball to some degree. And when you're a parent, you don't want your kid to just go to a camp where they just roll out the balls and just play games, right? You want them to learn and learn the game the right way. And so to Carl's point, when we relaunched 5-star, the power of the person and the parent had this experience at 5-star that we shared and know of it. And so in year one, we sold out the camp pretty quickly. This year, we doubled it to 2 sessions, and next year, hopefully, will be 4 sessions in different geos. But it's beautiful to see now that this continuity, the fact that Five Star has stood the test of time, it's 54 years old now, it's helped us because that parent who went to the camp now wants their kid to have that same kind of experience that they had. Obviously not with the elite kids, but making sure that they're learning the game, the intensity's there, and teaching is the number one priority.
Yeah, our podcast speaks well to that because, as I said off the top, the number of people that we've had discussions with here on the show that have in some way, shape, or form mentioned, whether having worked at Five Star, whether having gone to Five Star as a camper, whether having been a coach who recruited at Five Star. I think that it's touched so many different pieces of the basketball world and so many people. And as you said, you're getting into the age now where people who are, I'm going to be 50 this year, people who are my age, people who are a little bit younger, people who are a little bit older, have this memory of what the camp was, and they still hold on to it. I think that when I look at your social media and just the number of people that you have following Five Star basketball gives you a good indication of how much attachment people have to the brand. So it sounds like what you guys are planning to do is to continue to expand, maybe start with adding more weeks in New York. Is there an idea that you're going to eventually expand it out of New York City? Talk a little bit about what maybe the long-term plan is for continuing to grow the brand.
Yeah, this is something that we talk about at JDS Sports pretty often because Five Star is such a cool thing that we want to continue to use in a really impactful way. So one of the things that we've been talking about is using basketball and using Five Star to do good. So we PRC had the idea of Five Star Gives, and we're not exactly sure what that looks like yet. This is very much in its infancy as an idea, but the revenue that we're generating via camps, we want to expand our camps. There's also other means of revenue that we have, like merchandise. We want to get creative in what we can do and how we can give back to the basketball community. So one of the things that we were talking about is like court rebuilds or getting involved with basketball nonprofits. People like Hoops 2.0, Malcolm Brogdon from University of Virginia is doing this really cool thing where they're bringing water to villages in Africa, and that's the power of basketball, and that's something we want to get involved in. And although that heyday of Five Star basketball, what that looked like might never come back. That doesn't mean that we can't do really impactful things with the Five Star basketball brand and all of the history that's there.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I think that you're right in that I don't think anything is ever going to go back to the way it was where those elite players are going to congregate at a particular camp. Obviously, they're all on, whether it's the Under Armour circuit or the Nike EYBL circuit or whatever it is that they may be playing. I don't think that we're ever going to get them all back to any camp. But I do think that Five Star, without question, is an iconic brand. That orange T-shirt is something that to anybody who grew up in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, that shirt is iconic. I'm going to have to go and dig mine out because I know it's one of the ones that I look back. One. Well, I have one. I'm going to do when we're done tonight, before I go to bed, I'm going to go dig through my closet and find that shirt, and I'm going to take a picture of myself with that shirt on if it still fits.
Please do.
And I'll send it to you guys, or I'll put it on Twitter, because I think that shirt is iconic. It's instantly recognizable, and I think that once you guys continue to grow and continue to be able to put things together and organize it, and then if you add on that piece of using the brand to not only improve kids' basketball skills, but one of the things that we've been huge proponents of here on the podcast is using the game of basketball to be able to improve young people's lives. And that could be young people in Africa who don't have clean water to drink, or that just could be improving the character or leadership skills of a suburban kid here in the United States. And to me, that becomes more and more important. If you'd have told me that when I was 15, when basketball was my entire life, I probably would have looked at you cross-eyed and not understood it at all. And now, as a 50-year-old man who understands that the game is the game, it's important. I love it probably as much as I love anything in life. And yet I understand that basketball is just a piece. It's a tool that can be used to improve the lives of the people who the game touches, whether that's coaches, players, or people who maybe aren't even involved in the game, like what you're talking about, being able to bring clean water to people. So I think that is very, very admirable. I think it's a great way that you guys can use the brand to do good in the world. And that's something that is very exciting for me. And I'm certainly going to be keeping tabs on your progress with that. I want to give you guys a chance. I know you have, I'm going to use the term project. You have an upcoming project coming up centered around some of the themes that we've been talking about tonight. So whatever you guys want to or can share about that upcoming project, I think especially people who are listening, who are interested in 5-star, will be interested in hearing at least a teaser about what you guys may have coming up down the pike.
Yeah, I'll let PRC take that one. Yeah, go ahead.
No problem. Yeah. So what we're thinking about doing, so we talked about on this call, on this podcast, about the rich history of 5-star dating back to 66, is if you didn't go to the camp or you weren't really involved in basketball, you probably don't know the story of 5-star, right? You don't know all the coaches who launched their careers or who went on to do things way beyond basketball, in politics and business. You know, people who've worn that orange and white shirt have gone on to do many other things besides play pro basketball or coach college basketball at the highest level. So we're partnering with a very well-known media company to do a 5-chapter podcast serial about the history of 5-star, basically the birth of this institution that became this camp that created the shared experience, the players whose careers were discovered at 5-star, starting with Michael Jordan in July of 1980 when he was just known as Mike Jordan from Wilmington, North Carolina, which is a whole nother podcast on its own.
There you go.
Then you have the guys who necessarily came to camp with the biggest reputations who didn't make it. Right. And then you have this coaching fraternity that started with Hubie Brown and, you know, everyone to Frank Vogel's coaching the Lakers right now. Frank Vogel came to 5-star and he worked in the canteen, which is where, you know, he sold snacks and candy bars and drinks to kids just so that he can get up close and personal with these coaches and learn from them. And here he is coaching LeBron James and the Lakers, you know, leading the Western Conference. So you have that, and then you have like what is 5-star today and the things that we're talking about now. How do we use this platform for good? How do we use this platform, basketball as a unifier, to bring people together? How do we rebuild courts that, you know, bring kids back outdoors and get them to play outside, give them a good reason to come to the park, right? And activate for free. So if financials are you know, prohibitive for access to camp, make it free and do a lot of good through this game that we all love, right? And at the end of the day, it's just a game. And so you can use it as a tool or a vehicle to do these things. So we're working on that now. The idea is to launch that at the top of college basketball season next fall and pair it with a companion. We're calling it like a bookazine. Think of a coffee table magazine, high quality photos. We have an archive that Carl mentioned on this call of 14,000 photos going back to 66. And so there are so many gems in this archive and stories that we want to tell and capture through this companion book. So we're going to launch both of those things together the college basketball season with some pretty big names attached to it. So it's an exciting project to not only tell the history of the camp, but for those who don't know 5-star, what it could look like today.
That's going to be awesome. I can honestly say, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but at one time, did you have a lot of those photos in an archive on the 5-star website at one point? I know now you have a few, but at one point were there a lot more that were on the website, or did I find them somewhere else?
No, you're not imagining things. They were when 5-star turned 50 years old.
Okay.
We put out every single photo on a website, and when we launched them, and it was great. And we had Carl put a lot of them on our Facebook. You know, Facebook allows you to go year by year, and so
right.
you can index them by year. And so a lot of them right now are on Facebook. If you search through the archives by year, you'll see photos from, you know, the entire history of the camp. So we want to there's so many good ones that we just want to curate the best and tell those stories that many people just don't know that happen at 5-star.
Mike's gonna go back and look at the year that he was there and see if he can find a picture of himself.
No, I'm not honestly, I'm not going to find a picture of me, but I will say that when I discovered those photos, that took me down an unbelievable rabbit hole, because what I found myself doing was looking through each photo and looking at every player and trying to see, who's that guy? Can I recognize him? And who's standing in the back when this coach is teaching? You know, there's Alonzo Mourning being defended by some coach, and who are the guys in the background, and trying to identify who the different players were. You'd see a guy who clearly you would recognize, and then you see the players on his championship team. You're trying to look at them going, do I know any of those guys? And that was fascinating to me. So I'm sure the book is going to be fascinating from that same standpoint because you're drawing from that same stack of photos that I looked through several years ago when that was out there and available.
Well, go to the Facebook page and it's all indexed by year. You can go look because it took me a little bit of work to go get all those on Facebook. So
I'm sure it did.
I'd be happy to hear that somebody's
looking, well, at least
enjoying them.
at least you know you got one person that'll go out there and look at them, because I'm definitely going to go back and check that out for sure. So
there's actually one photo that I think summarizes this whole conversation that was special, and I actually didn't notice it when I first picked it up, but ultimately landed on it. And we just licensed this photo. ESPN's doing a 30 for 30 on Michael Jordan. I think it's a 10-part.
That thing's going to be awesome. I can't wait to see that.
It's going to be amazing. I guess to set the table for that season that they're going to kind of go deep on. They talk about the rise of Michael Jordan. And so, like I mentioned, he came to Pittsburgh for 2 sessions in the summer of 1980 as Mike Jordan. And 5-star, one thing, rain, sleet, hail, or snow, stations went on. Garf made sure he didn't care what it was. There was no excuse for not having stations every day. Like I said, there was the backbone. It was everything to him. And so one day it was raining when Michael was at camp. And so they did stations indoors. And there's a photo in a hallway with Pete Gillen, who now calls college basketball games for CBS Sports. He was a legendary college coach at Virginia and Xavier and other stops. And he's demonstrating a drill. And there's a guy wearing a, ironically, 23 practice jersey with his arms folded, but just locked in on what Pete Gillen's saying. Is none other than Michael Jordan. So that photo is going to make an appearance this documentary. But it just shows that, like, it brings it back indoors. Michael Jordan was a camper worker, right? He came at a discount. And Roy Williams, who was then a third assistant, basically a part-time assistant at North Carolina, initially called Konchalski to see if there was a spot for him at camp. Like, can you guys squeeze this kid in? We want to see if he's any good, right? Like, he came to our camp, he blew us away, but can he play against real competition? So can he bust tables to come to camp? This is Michael Jordan, right?
That's
Greatest
awesome.
player of all time. And doing stations indoors, right? After it was pouring, raining outside. So it kind of brings these things all together of like this rich history, these backstories, this time, this era that's gone, that you'll never replace, by the way, no matter how hard you try, but that made it special. And so we all hold it dear to us.
Completely understand. It's great stuff. Like I said, when I discovered that, I bet I spent at least an hour and a half looking through those photos. And like I said, trying to pick out who's who in the background of these photos and trying to find guys. So I had a blast with it. I'm sure there are other people out there who will enjoy it. So make sure you jump on the 5-star Facebook page. That being said, guys, I want to give you a chance to share how people can reach out to you if they have questions, if they want to get involved with 5-star. Share your social media handles so that people can find it. And then I'll jump back on and wrap up the episode. And if there's anything that we didn't touch on, one final point that you want to make or something that we left out, please go ahead and do that now as well.
Yeah, I mean, I got the great job of running our social media account. So definitely anybody listening, go out and follow us on Twitter or Instagram. It's the number 5 at 5-star basketball. And then the other really cool thing that I get to do is we send out a daily email where we call it the opening tip. It goes out at 7:30 a.m. every day. And it's just something to get your morning going, something usually basketball related. And if you want to opt into that email, you can go to our website. And if you scroll down on the home page to the bottom, you can put your info in there and we'll capture your email and add you to the list.
Yeah, I'll just close it with, I love what you guys do. We're hoop heads ourselves and basketball purists. So there's so many good camps out there today. The PGCs of the world who do it right, to your point. Jay Billis, Snow Valley. There's so many people that took what 5-star started many years ago and have replicated it around the country. So we're kind of proud of the fact that there is this competition, but yet the orange and white lives on. So, in a new way. So we're excited about the future of 5-star and the project we have underway. Like I mentioned, the podcast and bookazine. and look forward to rebuilding many courts both here. We have 2 coming in May and June with a big name NBA player, which we'll be able to share later, in Brooklyn. And so we're renovating 2 courts there. We're going to be activating with a free clinic, and we look forward to replicating that in many markets around the country.
Peter and Carl, we cannot thank you enough for spending almost an hour with us tonight going through the past, present, and future of 5-star basketball. It's been an absolute pleasure for me, someone who has a personal history with 5-star basketball, somebody who takes the legacy of the game very serious, somebody who is just a lover of the game of basketball. And I think 5-star is just such an important part of the history of the game. And I feel very, very honored that you guys took the time out of your schedule to come on the Hoopheads podcast and join up with us to be able to share some of that history. So we can't thank you enough. And hopefully, as some of these other projects come online, we can have you guys back on to talk about those. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. Registration is now open at headstartbasketball.com for this summer's Head Start basketball camps. We'll be hosting camps for boys and girls in grades 1 through 6 throughout the greater Cleveland area. Get registered today and make sure you hit the courts with us this summer.
Thanks for listening to the Hoopheads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.